This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Churchill. Churchill was released in 2015 by GMT Games and designed by Mark Herman. This game supports from 1 to 3 players and takes from 1 to 5 hours to play. Churchill is a political war game where each player assumes the role of one of the big 3 Allied leaders during World War II. In this game, leaders debate issues to win resources to advance their respective military fronts versus the Axis in the Europe and Pacific theaters. While winning World War II is the primary objective, each leader is also attempting to best position his nation politically for the post-war world. The progress towards these various objectives are awarded victory points, which will ultimately determine the winner of the game. This is the Churchill board game setup for the training scenario. Yes, this is the training scenario. While there is a lot of activity on the board, this is actually a fairly simple game once you break it down. And in typical Harsh Rules fashion, that's what we're going to do so you can digest it a piece at a time. So first, let's ground ourselves with a quick overview of what this game is actually about and what we'll be doing. The game board is divided into 2 displays. On the left side is the conference display. Players begin the game on this side of the board. Each player represents one of the big 3 Allied leaders during World War II. Winston Churchill from England, Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union, and, initially, Franklin Delano Roosevelt from the United States. The visual on this side of the board represents these 3 powerful leaders sitting across from each other at a round conference table. The Churchill board game is organized in up to 10 of these historical conferences that took place during World War II. Each round of play in the game is divided into 2 phases. The first half is the conference phase. The objective of the conference phase is to debate up to 7 issues that in turn will provide resources and directives necessary to use in the second phase. The second half of the game round takes place during the war phase on the other half of the board. The left side of the board is the military display. The military display shows maps of the Europe and Pacific theaters of World War II. Overlaying these maps are front tracks of military spaces leading to the Axis capital for each theater. Each of these front tracks are the responsibility of a particular Allied nation. Resources won during the conference phase of the game are applied to these front tracks to advance a particular nation's front line. The front line is represented by a front marker color-coded to that Allied nation. Green for England, blue for America, and red for the Soviet Union. At the end of the game, the proximity of these front markers to the Axis capital of their respective theater will award victory points to the Allied nation for their contribution to winning the war. Besides winning the war, each nation is also trying to cement its political position in the post-war world. Each Allied nation will attempt to spread their ideological influence by placing clandestine networks and political alignment with colonies and countries branching off from the front tracks. All of these activities translate into victory points that are tracked on the record track that will ultimately determine the winner of the game. Now that we get the layout of the board, let's rewind and start from the conference track again. Let's walk through a brief example of how winning and debating issues work. This is just to give you a general idea of the mechanics. We will cover off on the full procedures of running a conference in subsequent episodes of this tutorial series. At the beginning of this phase, the top card is drawn from the conference deck. Each conference card corresponds to that game round's historical conference. For example, this conference card is for the first conference in Casablanca. Each conference card updates the situation for each Allied nation and general military and clandestine events to be played out on the military side of the board during the second half of the game round. Next, the players representing the Allied nations and the Big Three will select up to 7 issues to debate during the conference from the 18 issue markers on the conference issues section of the game board. Conference issues are often negotiated directives to advance an army or open a new front, control a theater, and develop the A-bomb. There are also several opportunities to insert clandestine and political networks into countries and colonies adjacent to the advancing military fronts to cement a nation's political power in the post-war world. Also, each nation begins a round with a set amount of production markers that act as the game's currency. Obviously, historically, not all allied nations are as wealthy as others, so many times issues regard how America or Britain will spend their resources. Finally, there are broader political relationship agreements between the big three that can be debated, called world issues. Essentially, this is what I sarcastically call the big three love triangle, and is more or less represented as such on the game board. By winning this issue, players can move the black pawns on the game board to change the rules for placing and removing clandestine networks and political alignment markers. This can create additional tension in an allied nation's ability to score victory points for this segment of the game. These selected issues will be presented and debated by each nation's diplomatic staff. In the game, the staff are represented by 21 staff cards for each allied nation. At the beginning of a conference, each player will randomly draw 7 staff cards to represent their nation during the conference. Most of the time, an issue will begin at the center of the conference table. Let's use A-bomb research as our example. A-bomb research is tracked on the military display of the board. The blue pawn represents the scientific progress of the Americans towards developing the bomb. The red pawn represents a Soviet spy ring attempting to steal the secrets for themselves. Any player winning this issue will allow the Americans to roll a die to see if they make progress in the research. However, if the Soviets win this issue, then they can also advance their spy ring's progress by 1 on the track. Several victory points are at stake for the US and UK to successfully develop the bomb, versus the Soviets stealing the A-bomb secrets and preventing its development. Therefore, Churchill will try to prevent the Soviets winning the issue by progressing this issue on his track. To win an issue, a player will put down one of their 7 staff cards. Let's say Churchill plays Anthony Eden's staff card. For this particular member of the staff, their debating strength is shown as a number in the upper left-hand corner of the card. This means that the issue marker is moved 5 spaces towards Churchill's chair. Since the A-bomb research marker is at the center of the board, it moves 5 spaces onto Churchill's track towards his chair. Once an issue is on a leader's track, that player is considered to be winning the issue. And if the issue reaches a leader's chair, it is considered won and cannot be debated further. So basically, to win that issue, the marker must either be on the player's track or at the player's chair at the end of the conference. Now, I mentioned debating. If the issue is not at the leader's chair, it can be debated by another player. To debate an issue, that player presents their own staff card and pulls the issue back towards their chair. The number of spaces to move the issue is determined by the debating strength of that player's staff card. For example, let's say the Stalin player decides to debate the issue and plays their Andrei Zhdanov staff card. Andrei Zhdanov has a debate strength of 2. Therefore, the atomic bomb research issue is pulled back towards Stalin's chair by 2 spaces. Or, another way of looking at it, since the issue was debated, it can only advance 3 spaces. Taking Anthony's debate strength of 5 and subtracting Andrei Zhdanov's 2. Players will continue debating issues until there are no longer any staff cards. Following a conference, players will then take the issues they've won. These are issues that are either on their track or in their chair at the end of the conference, and then proceed to the other side of the board for the war phase. Now, admittedly, this is a very brief and simplistic view of the conference phase, just to give you an idea of how the mechanics work. Typically, there are several more issues on the table at varying distance to leader chairs, and the strategy to secure what you need for your preferred front strategy and post-war situation can be pretty engaging. This is just a taste of what the conference phase has to offer, and we will return later in the tutorial to cover this section in much greater detail. I'm going to pause the overview here now that we're back to the second half of the game round. You see, I believe the best way to learn to play Churchill is backwards. My teaching theory about this game is that it's easier to learn about the job that must be done first, before selecting the tools to get it done. In the way that Churchill is played and often taught, it's all about the tools first, with no context as to why they're important and where to use them. In this way, new players to Churchill lose focus or miss important points because they don't know the context for the actual job. This can make Churchill seem extremely complex because there's a lot of information backtracking to learn the game. The following episodes of the tutorial will go into this game in much greater detail. And in the next episode of this tutorial, you'll begin to see that this game is actually ridiculously simple. I hope this overview of Churchill from GMT Games gave you an understanding of the overarching structure and types of gameplay you can enjoy with your friends. If you're interested in learning more about Churchill, then come back for the next episode where we will begin formally learning the game mechanics, starting with the war phase and working our way back to the conference phase. I believe this is the quickest and easiest way to learn this game. Questions about this game, requests for future Harsh Rules game tutorials, and constructive feedback are all greatly appreciated. Drop a line in the comments section. To be the first notified when this episode and any Harsh Rules episode is placed online, please subscribe to this channel. Until then, I'm Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.